Business Connections Live, the UK's leading online business channel. This is Business Connections Live with Steve Hyland.
Hello there, welcome along. This is Business Connections Live, the program for entrepreneurs, SMEs and business owners. Now, today's show, we're going to be discussing on how to stand up to those tough questions that you get in business. We've all seen it on the television, an executive or maybe a CEO from a large multinational, they're standing there and that tough question, the one that comes out of the blue, arrives on their doorstep and they just don't know exactly how to either articulate the answer. They may well know the answer, but they don't know how to articulate a clear, concise answer, or they just don't want to answer the question at all. How do you get round that situation? More and more businesses are now coming up against the media on a daily basis, be it radio, be it television, be it whatever it is, social media, whatever. So how do you make certain that you get your message across? How do you make certain that you are prepared to answer that tough question? Joining me in the studio today is Michael Dodd. He's a professional speaker and the author of Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work. Michael, it's lovely to have you with us today.
Great to be here, Steve.
For those people that have never heard of Michael Dodd before, and I'm sure there's going to be a few because you're one of the guys...
Can't be that many.
There'll be one or two then, maybe just one. Who's Michael Dodd? Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
He is a one-time journalist from Australia who was trained in the art of what is a technical term in the world of Australian journalism, blowtorch-on-the-belly questions. So I was specially trained by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation to go out and put my microphone in front of business people or politicians or worse and put devil's advocate questions to them on behalf of the viewer, of course, so that the viewers and listeners would know that the reporter was working for them and getting the right answers out of people or getting the right reactions from people. And these days, as a recovering journalist, Michael Dodd helps people answer those questions. Not always to journalists, because often in business, the tough questions come from clients, from prospects, often from their own teams. So the same kind of things which can work for a great answer on the media can, with some adaptation sometimes, work for your own internal audience or for those clients and prospects.
Do you think over the time that you've been involved in the industry and what you're doing now, the kind of training that you're delivering, has the whole psyche of the way people ask questions, do you think it's changed? I talked to my father, he's 94, and he's very much of the boss is this, he was that, he would do as he was told. But things are changing now. It seems that journalists are becoming much more aggressive in their style of questioning, and employees aren't so standoffish when it comes to answering questions that they want to have. So do you think the whole thing is changing? We've got to be more aware of these skills.
In Britain, things certainly have changed. In Australia, we have this kind of ruthless egalitarianism, so that, as we say, Jack is as good as his master. And I've got this theory, which may not be completely right, but that Britain is actually becoming a bit more Australianised in the sense that the class barriers are breaking down and people are becoming more informal in the business world and beyond, which means that if you're a boss, in one sense, you're more likely to get upstart questions, tough questions. They may be perfectly reasonable questions, but you need to be ready for them in a way that perhaps back in the days of British deference, you didn't need to be so ready for them because no one would ask them. And these days, when you've got the internet and social media everywhere, nothing is really private in the way it used to be. So that if a boss says something monumentally stupid in answer to a question, it can be whizzed around in a way that through Facebook, Twitter, etc., as well as the normal gossip network, the way that it didn't used to be back in the old days.
When we watch television today, we see the likes of Jeremy Paxman on the box, and when we're actually broadcasting this on the live programme, this is the week that The Apprentice with Lord Sugar comes back, and from a personal standpoint, I actually think there's a lot of damage being done within business because there are young business people, young entrepreneurs that are watching the likes of The Apprentice, and they think that's how business should be done, yelling, screaming, not answering questions. Do you think that is slowly working its way into the norm now?
I'd hope that it doesn't.
Well, we both hope it won't.
Well, I hope
do you think it is?
The situation as portrayed in The Apprentice, where everyone's after themselves in a way that could never work in the business world, because nothing would ever get agreed or done if that's what it was really like. But I think that is an indicator that the workplace is different from how it used to be. And, there's a lot more in the way of vigorous exchange and free exchange in a way that there wasn't, both downwards and upwards. And that's why it's really good to actually know how to answer those tough questions in the workplace, which can come from more places now and be spread around in more places than ever before.
Typically, when people come to you, what are they looking for? Are they looking for the actual answers, or are they looking for the skills and the techniques to deliver the answers?
Well, it's not my job when I'm helping people to actually give them the answers, because they're the expert in their field. So I need to often ask them the right questions in order to help them formulate the best answers. But what they're after is technique. And the good news for your viewers is that it is a learnable skill. That there are bad ways of answering questions and there are really good ways of answering questions, and you can learn the techniques of how to do it. And a great answer is a great answer not just for the person giving the answer, but also for the person receiving it, and often the wider audience. And so what I'm trying to do is get them to realise that it is important to engage, and it's important to actually get across the right message to the right audience, and to use the techniques which I can show them in order to do that.
When you walk into an office for the first time, or you've had a commission, or you're about to do some training, is there a moment when your inner voice, the inner voice of Michael Dodd, goes, "It's that again"? Is there a common thread, do you think, that goes between nearly all businesses where similar mistakes are made? And if so, what is that similar mistake?
There's probably several. One would be, if you take the media, people are more scared of the media in business than they typically should be. And often, perhaps nearly always, the business has a good story to tell. And if the media are asking, it's so much better to engage, but to engage with the media in a way that you are in a confident position.
So what does that mean then, to engage if you're in a confident position? So what does that mean in reality?
When the media ring up, don't say, "Oh, what are the questions?" Or don't say, "No, I never speak to the media," and put the phone down. It's to actually, in the first instance, find out what that particular media outlet wants or needs for their audience, and to explore the possibility that you can actually give it to them. Sometimes it might be better to say, "Look, speak to the company up the road," because they're in a better position to answer those kind of questions. And sometimes it could be, "Yes, we can do that. I'm not the best person to do it, but someone on my team who probably has been trained," but you don't need to say that, is in a good position to help you. Basically,
so
the media
build a rapport with
the media are real people, and if you're nice to them and give them stuff which is useful to their audience, then there's a win-win to be had there. And rather than seeing the media as being out to get you, it's more a matter of how can I actually give them what they need to tell the audience what they need to know about my great company.
It's interesting. I once received a phone call from Rita Chakrabarti. And
from the BBC, I imagine.
From the BBC, yeah. Just no name dropping, but received a phone call. There'd been an article in some of the red tops about a channel I'd worked on, had left, knew nothing about it. And instead of going, "Oh my word, it's the red tops and BBC Radio 4, I was able to talk to them, and talk to them as one broadcaster to another broadcaster, because it could have been a tricky situation that one found oneself in. And you've got to be prepared for that. It doesn't matter where you are in the food chain, you've got to be in control of what you're about to say, what you're going to say, and know what you're going to say.
Well, one of the things that people often do get wrong in the media context is they don't find out enough about the situation before they're on. So sometimes they will agree to do an interview over the telephone or over Skype straight away, and after they've agreed to it...
Because they see it as publicity, don't they?
Well, yes, and that can be good, but you always want to know the purpose of it, what is behind it, and the media will, sometimes slightly grudgingly, give you the answers. So when the media approach, number one is ask the media questions. Don't do this within an interview, because in the interview you've got one interviewer and one interviewee, and if you're the interviewee, you've got to be answering the questions, not asking them. But when the interviewer or their research team ring you up to ask you, would you go on program XYZ, then you can certainly say, I'm really interested to find out more about that, and ask them a few questions. Like one question they often forget to ask is, who else are you talking to? And if the answer is your worst enemy, or the rival company, or a rare case of someone who's had your service and it didn't go very well, then you know where the questions are coming from. You don't need to say, what are the questions? But you need to know that they've spoken to, Mr. Bloggs, and they have Mr. Bloggs' view about your company. So if you are going to engage with the media, you know what are the kind of questions you need to be ready for. And don't just go into it thinking, I hope I think of something smart on the spur of the moment. What really good preparation to questions from the media and elsewhere involves is planning, preparation, and practice. And actually, if you do that, you can actually perform well, which is for the benefit of the interviewer and the wider audience.
There is another P, isn't it? But we're not going to go that way at the moment. But some really good advice already for you on this edition of the programme, if you have been approached by the media in the past, and it can be print media all the way through to broadcast media, then you need to be prepared for it. Those 3 Ps are really, really important. My guest on today's show is Michael Dodd, a professional speaker, author of Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work. Now, let's look back at last week's program. If you're enjoying today's show, by the way, it's great to know that you're there. We're live every Monday, of course, at midday. It's good to have your company with us here at Business Connections Live. We had a great show last week. We had Jerry Brown, and he is the customer lifeguard, and we were talking all about customer experience. A real insight, once again, as always, from Jerry about what you should be doing to make certain that your customers are going to be happy. And to a certain extent, what Michael's talking about today is also maybe a part of that too. The words that you use, the way you communicate with your customers will make them feel maybe engaged, or make them feel that they want to work with you in the future. We talked a lot last week about Ryanair. Of course, Ryanair has been through all sorts of ups and downs. It got even worse as the week went on. But there was an interesting thing that stuck in my mind from last week when Jerry was talking. He mentioned a quote from Michael O'Leary, who is the CEO of Ryanair, and he said his aircraft are full of people who said they would never fly with him again. So sometimes, does it really matter what you do say and the way you say it? Can you just get away by providing something, in the case of Ryanair, that is, pilot high, sell it cheap? It's a consideration sometimes, and you just got to stand back and have a bit of a think. So how important then is the customer experience to your business? And the other thing as well is, if you apply some of the rules to it, do you actually see an increase in your bottom line? Is it something that is tangible in a monetary way? Great show last week, some good advice from Jerry. Just to remind you, here's a few highlights from last week's edition of Business Connections Live. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest in the studio today is Jerry Brown. He is the customer lifeguard. We're asking the question today, is customer experience disappearing into a sea of indifference?
And really working now more with organizations, helping them focus on what makes customer experience work for them, but also how do they enable it. I feel very strongly about it, and I think, as you pointed out, we're still struggling a little bit with customer service and customer experience. Think about the BA meltdown. Think about the United Airlines. Once again, they made the headlines. And very recently, of course, we've got Ryanair. And what was fascinating was that there were people on there saying, we'll never fly with Ryanair again, we hate them, and all of the kinds of things you'd expect. And his response was, my booking engine is full of people who said they would never fly with Ryanair again. People will complain or moan, but they actually won't do anything about it. So as customers, I think we have a certain responsibility. It's not just the company. And one of the things I try to do in the work that I do is to really put some of the, if you like, the pressure on the customer. And the experience I had with clearly employees that were engaged, the first time I realized it was with the safety announcement. As we know, that is regulated. You must have a safety announcement. But the way they did it with humor, and everyone listened, and they're not the first airline to do this, but you just got a sense that these people were really proud about what they were doing. And the way I put it is that there's probably three key things that most people want. They want an acknowledgement. They want someone to tell them, Mr. Brown, thank you for calling. I'm sorry you've had a problem with this, and we'll do our best to sort it out. They want an acceptance of responsibility, or they want accountability. So the person that you're speaking to, Mr. Brown, I'll do my best to sort this out for you. I realize this is a concern. Let me see what I can do about it. And then they want action. They want you to actually do something. So it's not just about talking about it, we'll see if we can fix this. They want some really clear action. And if you can provide those three things for people, it's amazing how well they will respond and how well your advisors, or whatever you call your people that deal with customer service, will feel about it. I was at a station just last week, and they had some delays. And most of us will understand delays. Most of us don't have an issue. This was a problem with the overhead wires. Fine, I get that. If you have a problem with the overhead wires, I want you to fix it. I don't want that to be a problem. But what I do want you to do is provide me with some reasonable explanation, and then some hope of when the next train might be coming along. And again, one of the things I talk about a lot is commitment. Commitment from the senior executive, but also commitment from the bottom up. If you have that, if the senior people, and my example about HomeServe was a really good example of how that changed. HomeServe brought in a new CMO, a guy named Greg Reed, who's now gone on to be their CEO, and he had a tremendous impact by coming in, recognizing what the issues were, being honest and candid enough to admit within the organization what was going on, and then to be able to affect change by doing it. Because when people see that, when people see they're not hiding behind excuses, they're not hiding behind other things as BA did with their situation, people will come on board with you, because that's what you need to do. You need to bring everyone on board. Simply because the CEO or somebody says we're going to do something doesn't mean it will happen. Is that I think employees have become more engaged and more empowered, despite the fact that I'm sometimes critical. I think what I'm seeing is there is definitely to use the pun, a sea change in how people are treated. And I think organizations are recognizing that they need to have people on their side. You can't just mandate it. You can't sit someone at a desk and say, right, you will do this. Thank you again, Steve. I'm Jerry Brown, the Customer Lifeguard, and as far as I'm concerned, if we don't get our people behind the work that we're doing, if we don't engage them, if we don't empower them, if we don't get them emotionally connected with our customers, then the chances of getting any of our customers to do business with it again is going to be very, very, very much restricted. And while you think, well, Jerry, that all sounds obvious, I think we all know that we've dealt with organizations that don't do that particularly well. So it's really what I call the easy way. Engagement, empowerment, emotional connection, empathy, and enablement. The last one being, if you enable your people to do the right thing for your customers, then you have a far better chance of making customer experience work for you, not just today, but in the future.
Absolutely fantastic program. If you get an opportunity, do watch the entire show. That's Jerry Brown there, and we were talking all about customer experience. Don't forget, there's over 250 hours of great business advice for you. Everything from how to raise funds for your business, how to use social media, how to do sales, different sales techniques. Everything is there. And today, of course, we are talking about how to answer those difficult questions when somebody comes to you. By the way, if you think the program is great and you're thinking to yourself, you know, I have a program like that for my own organisation, my own business, why don't you get in contact with us here at Business Connections Live? We can customise and brand the studio especially for you and do something rather wonderful, in fact. And if you're sending out newsletters at the moment, well, turn your readers into viewers. Engage with your audience that is out there. They'd rather be finding out a little bit more about you, seeing what your personality is, hearing the sound of your dulcet tones. So you can have a program like this one. If you want more details on that, it's that easy to do. All you got to do is send us an email to this address. It is studio@businessconnectionslive.com. Nice and easy. If you want to have a chat about it, and we like chatting, Linda and myself, she's back off our holidays now, so she may well answer the telephone. Then again, she may not. 01784 256 777 is our telephone number. You can follow our stream of consciousness each and every week, and also through the week as well. And if we like what you're tweeting about, we'll retweet you too. Please retweet us. That's at BCL Business TV. You can also watch the program live each and every week on Facebook Live, getting a lot of response there, along with iTunes as well. So we're all over the place. And very shortly, we're going to be broadcasting the program simultaneously on Ustream, Periscope, YouTube, Facebook Live, and a whole host of other platforms as well, along with the podcast platforms like Stitcher and Blueberry, and the list just goes on and on. So it doesn't matter where you are, you'll be able to view and listen to the program. Don't forget the website as well. Loads of information there. It is businessconnectionslive.com. One other thing, if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe right now. I'm telling you, subscribe to the channel, because it helps us. Subscribe to the channel and be part of the throng of people who are learning on a weekly basis how to make their business more successful. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest in today's program is Michael Dodd. He's a professional speaker and also the author of Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work. Here is the book. It is available. It's published by Wiley, and it's available on Amazon. What's the thoughts behind writing the book? Because I sometimes feel that when you write the book, you give the game away. You tell them all your secrets.
Well, that makes writing the second book hard, because you put all the secrets in the first one, I'm told. But basically, people do get wound up about media interviews and other situations, job interviews, and any situation where they can be put under pressure and asked these kind of blowtorch-on-the-belly questions. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that you can actually do better than you're doing now if you actually know what you're doing. And so the book actually contains the golden formula for allowing you to give great answers to tough questions in the workplace.
That's a promise, isn't it? Mm. So, ladies and gentlemen, the golden formula is in the book. Some of the chapter titles, the tools that you need: winning answers every time, crafting the right message to underpin every answer, harnessing the power of stories, which is very important, and then things like great answers during price negotiations, great answers for clients. I mean, the book is just packed full, and it's little writing as well. There aren't that many pictures for that matter, but it is packed full of great advice. I cannot stress highly enough that you get a copy of the book. It is Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work. Get your copy. You'll find it on Amazon, and it's a good read, and it will be useful. It's the kind of book that most business owners will actually need to have in their bookshelves at work. Let's work our way through that key advice that we want to give to our viewers today. What do business people need to know most about answering tough questions? What do you think they get wrong the most often? What's the most common mistakes that you see?
Well, in the media context, they think sometimes that they can avoid the questions and get away with it. And unless you want to look like a slimy, sleazy, question-avoiding politician, which most people don't want to look like, that is not a good idea. But what they can also do, apart from actually answer the questions, is to get a positive point across. And the golden formula, and there's two of them, are about actually dealing with the question. But once you've actually answered the question, under the normal rules of human conversation, you're allowed to say a little bit more. And typically you say a little bit more to help the person asking the question.
There is an aggressive stance now, though, particularly if it's something that is particularly in the world of politics, but shall we say in the world of business. You're an organisation, maybe an energy company, you just put your prices up. There is that nearly confrontational style from the interviewer that won't allow you to answer or to give additional information. How do you get around that?
Well, if you actually provide the answer bang straight up, and then you're trying to be a little bit more helpful, put it in a wider context for the people who are actually listening to the conversation, then it's only a bad interviewer who will stop you. I mean, there are a few bad interviewers out there who just think that they should interrupt every moment of the interview, and people around the country listen to this. There's one particular program that they listen to, and you hear people complaining afterwards all day. Oh, that interviewer didn't let the interviewee actually get across the point.
So he's on in the morning, is he?
It is a male person.
In the morning?
In the morning, yes. There is known to a member of your staff, apparently.
Right. On a state broadcaster.
I wouldn't be too specific. Yeah. Let's protect it.
You old politician there, aren't you? See, you're avoiding the question.
There is a rule called the specific to the general. So you're asking me a specific question. Who is this person?
Who is this person?
Yeah. And what I'm doing is giving you a general picture, but I'm addressing your question. And there's a number of people out there.
Nice technique.
You may be thinking of one person in your mind. Someone else may be thinking of someone else on another station. And I've got a theory. You've got a theory. And it may not be helpful. I think there's a legal person who actually watches this program. And it may not be helpful to be too specific. And that's where a rule called the specific to the general, which is mentioned in the book, can help. So that you're actually addressing the issue and being as helpful as you possibly can without actually getting into legal trouble.
Well, I won't take the hump over all of this then, and we'll move smartly on then. So answering those tough questions then, something that can be taught, a skill that people can actually learn, and is it about understanding the linguistics, the way they are speaking, understanding their own inner voice as well? For instance, it's always this difficult question, the energy companies once again, when they get asked, why are you increasing pricing? And they know that it's an uncomfortable answer. How do you get around that kind of direct question?
Well, they need to be honest and say why they are putting up prices. There's no getting around that. And I suppose one of the things that I say to people when something has gone wrong or they're in an uncomfortable position is they need to look at themselves and say, well, is this our fault? Is it something we should be apologising for? Or is it something that there's a very good explanation for, which is the reason why we've taken the decision, and therefore use the opportunity of the tough questions to actually get across that explanation.
What do you recommend to people that are in that situation? How do you recommend that they prep for that? Is it a case of writing out a number of different scenarios? Is it a case of writing stock answers that they should have? Is it a case of having a larger picture in your head or a story to tell? What do you think the best way is to prep for that?
There's a combination of things you want to do, but the worst thing is to do nothing. And often a fear of media interviews is actually a fear of preparation for media interviews. The same as actual speaking in public and taking questions from an audience. Often the fear is not actually doing it. It's the fear that, I'm going to have to actually sit down and think about it in advance. So I recommend to everyone to think about it in advance. And if you ask the right questions about the situation, you have a much better idea in advance of what the situation you're going into is, and you should be prepared. So if you're an electricity company and you've just put up the prices, then you know that if you go on a TV or radio show, they're going to be asking you why, and is it fair to the consumers? How do you possibly justify this? How much are you earning, and are you paying yourself too much? And you need to be ready for those kind of questions. And ultimately, what is said is determined by how it's said, so that if you do put in the effort of planning, preparation and practice, you can be so much better than just relying on hope I think of something smart at the time, which, often people can't.
It's just not going to happen. What about this old saying is, I'd rather die than give a public speech or public speaking. How do you get around the nervousness? Because a lot of these people can be tyrants in the boardroom and with their employees, but when it comes to public speaking, sometimes they don't have that natural charisma because of their nerves. How do you get around nerves? You're a public speaker. Do you still feel nervous before you go out on stage?
The ideal state, and this happens to me and probably to you too, is that you want to be kind of keyed up. One of the messages I get across, both for speaking to an audience or answering tough questions in a TV studio or elsewhere, is that it is a performance. And you need to be aware of that. Now, that doesn't mean acting, because you need to be yourself, you need to be true to yourself, but you also need to be fair to yourself and allow the best position to come across. And that position is only going to come across better if you've actually given some forethought and you think, yes, they quite obviously will ask me this and they could ask me that. I need to be ready for it. So it's not a matter of stock answers, because that can make you look like a talking robot, which is not very good. But you do want to have certain positive things and positive examples to give in the course of an interview, and that is helpful for the wider audience and helpful for you.
It was more the psychology of nerves, I think, because people, it's the loneliest place in any studio is 5 foot in front of a camera. That's the place you really don't want to be. It's those kind of nerves. I was kind of, do you have techniques to get around that nervousness, that alien location that you find yourself in?
Well, yes, there's a number of things. From as simple as taking a big slow breath before you go on, which is confidence enhancing. It also allows you to have lots of air in your lungs, so you're not gasping for breath along the way. And also how you sit, how you stand is important. You want to have your hands open, not sitting there like this or standing up like this, looking as though you're defensive, because that will also make you feel defensive as well. So there are some things, but ultimately the point that I really try to impress upon audiences and individuals that I'm working with is that if you know that you've thought about it in advance and you've got the right positive things to say in response to the obvious negative questions, then you've got a right to feel more confident, and you will feel more confident. If you go in there having done no preparation and no forethought, then it's quite understandable you're going to actually feel and look as if you're lacking confidence and you don't want to be there.
Say you've got all the right answers, because you kind of alluded there to the world of NLP, haven't you, or the body language. So the open palms, I've got nothing to hide, all of these things. How important is body language and facial expressions? How important is that in the interview?
It's supremely important, because people, when they turn on your TV channel, they'll make a view of you, and maybe even of me as well, in the first few seconds.
They might make a view of both of us.
Possibly, yeah. And that is partly determined on how we position our bodies and the facial expression. And so it is important. If someone walks into a room that you're in and you've never seen them before, you will make a judgment about them, whether you like them, trust them, believe them, in the first few seconds of them interacting with you, even if they're just coming in to offer you a cup of coffee or something. Now, the really important thing when you're actually in the spotlight is facial expression, which you mentioned, is that your facial expression needs to reflect the content of what you're saying. And so, if you're talking about a tragedy, as we're going to air, there's a terrible tragedy in America that's unfolding in Las Vegas. And if you're talking about that, obviously you need to look suitably somber, because it's a very serious situation, an awful situation. And if your face says anything other than that, people will think, what's going on here? This is very strange. Can I trust this person, etc.? So you do need to make sure that both your facial expression and the tone of your voice is in line with what you're saying at any particular moment. And you might think, well, that should happen automatically. And in most cases it does. But if you've actually gone through and you've actually done a little bit of planning, preparation, practice and forethought, and you've actually got some positive points you want to get across, then it's so much easier in the moment to be focusing on your actual performance, as opposed to what on earth am I going to say next, which actually is an unsettling thought.
Listen, we've got more from Michael Dodd in just a few moments' time. Michael Dodd, professional speaker and author of Great Answers to Tough Questions. Our Work is a good book. If you get an opportunity, do get your hands on a copy of that publication. You're watching Business Connections Live. We're live on a Monday. It's great to have your company as always. Hope you're finding today's programme of interest to you. If you do find it really tough when you're going out there, a lot of CEOs that I've met, there are a lot of people out there that cannot speak in public. And sometimes some of the way that they phrase things is somewhat endearing when you're talking one-to-one to them, but when they're standing on a stage or they are presenting to their business, it can become somewhat annoying as well. More about that, more from Michael in just a few moments' time. What we're going to do now, we're just going to give you some more advice. We're going to go back in time to a program that we did in June of 2017. It was Business Connections Live 185. It was with Ian Dixon, an old friend of the program. He came on the show, Why Silence is Never Golden in Business. He's an international business speaker, multi-award winning business coach. And when he came on the program, he was talking about how do you raise your profile, encourage new customers and keep existing ones. Making a noise in business is all about sticking your head above the parapet, telling people you're there. But it's not just about talking. It's also about the behind the scenes techniques that you can do to make your business voice heard. It was a great show. Just going to give you the key takeaways from that program. And just to remind you about the show, here's Ian Dixon.
Hi there, my name is Ian Dixon. I am an international business speaker and award-winning business coach. Today I have been talking to Steve about all sorts of things, and I want to just give you my sort of big takeaways, if you like. So, money loves speed, critical. If you don't demonstrate on your website how quickly you can deliver your product or service, you need to make sure that you change that. Have an outstanding About Us page on your website is critical. When anybody is giving you some advice or an opinion, stop and assess, is this advice or is it an opinion? And advice very clearly is something based on expertise, knowledge, understanding and experience. And one other, understanding what success means to you and why you're in business at all. So I think probably there's a few. I could just keep going and going and going, to be honest.
Ian Dixon there, and a great show as well as always. Don't forget, if you want to watch the entire programme, you'll find it. It went out in June 2017 and it's Business Connections Live 185. We're live here on Business Connections Live. It is a Monday at lunchtime. It's great to have your company as always. And joining me in the studio today is Michael Dodd, professional speaker and author of Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work. Michael, let's look at some of the other techniques. There is a question that we've got here about how do you prepare yourself for the rigorous kind of questions, the rigorous, the nasty interviewer. Is that pretty much what we've been saying, isn't it? It's as long as you've got the preparation there, as long as you know what you're going to say, you've got the NLP all sorted out now, you know what you're going to be doing with your body. What's the big mistake for doing that? Is it just a lack of preparation again?
Well, that can be a mistake. As part of the preparation for the big occasion that you mention, then you want to be tested out. If you've ever seen The West Wing, that program about American politics, you know, the president, and it's not just one president, because there's other presidents, you know, get their staff all gathered around them in the Oval Office to fire questions at them before they go out and do a press conference, so that they're actually getting themselves in the right mindset and also being ready for anything. And so, you know, the staff around him are not doing the president any favours by asking soft, easy questions, although you want to be ready for those as well as really stupid questions. But the really tough ones in particular, a president or you as someone running a business need to be ready for them. And, you know, that's where you need to be thinking it through. And if you apply the golden formula, the fundamental is that you basically answer the question, but you also say something else that's helpful to the audience, and the golden formula will show you how to do that. But if you are ready to do that on a whole variety of subjects, then you've got every reason to go into the situation and be confident, and to turn the negatives of the tough questions into positives, because they are an invitation for you to give your view, and you have a chance to actually get positive messages across. One of the mistakes that people make is often they're in a situation where they're just playing ping pong. They get asked a tough question, they just hit it defensively back over the net and then wait for the next one. And what you really need to do is play rugby. You get the tough question, you pick up the ball and you run down the other end of the field and you put the ball where you want it. So you're saying what needs to be said for that situation. And that, if it's done right, is helpful to both the person asking the question and the wider audience. And is also helpful for you.
You know, some really good advice coming over from this today. What about other areas that we can use these similar skills? Say, I mean, your book itself alludes to this, doesn't it? How to use, just looking at the chapter here, great answers for prospects, great answers during price negotiations for clients, those nerve-wracking job interviews, great answers for your boss. So once you've got these skills firmly in your head, these techniques in your head, how do you apply them to other areas within business then?
Well, it's really important to make sure that whatever you're saying is right for that audience. So if it's in a one-to-one situation with the job interview, you've got to be knowing your audience, the person who's asking you the questions. But there'll also be a wider audience, because presumably there'll be a wider bunch of people who will actually end up having to make a decision. And you need to have that audience in your head. So one of the fundamentals, so that you can utilize the golden formula in the book to any situation, is to get your head inside the mind of the audience. And then that allows you to empathize with them and to realize what they need from you. And what you're always trying to do in a tough question situation is hit that win-win point, so that I'm saying what I need to say, but I'm also telling you what you need. It may not be what you want to hear exactly, but it's what you need. If it's a journalist, the journalist needs things, facts and stories, to do their report for the news program. If it's a job interview situation, then the person asking the questions needs certain things from you to know what you're going to be like if we employ you. And once you get your head in the mind of the audience, which a lot of people don't instinctively do, but once you get into that habit, it's easy then to adapt the formula to any situation.
Is that the crux of it, do you think? Getting your head into the mind of the audience, understanding what you're actually saying, why you're saying it, who it's going to impact, and what maybe the benefits, the features of whatever it is. Actually truly understanding what your message is.
There's not a lot of diagrams in the book, but there's one diagram which sums up exactly what I've been saying. It's one picture, and in the picture it's your agenda, because you want to be going into a situation with an agenda. But even more important than your agenda is another circle, an overlapping circle, which is the agenda of that particular audience. And what you need to do is find the overlap point between your agenda and their agenda. So, you know, if you've got a particular problem in your office and I've got this amazing product which will solve it, then we're in that overlap point where there's a win-win for both of us. And this is where it's hard, however brilliant you are, to actually think of it on the spur of the moment. But with a little bit of forethought, you can actually find that overlap between the two circles in advance. And that's the way that you can be giving great answers to, in the sales world, what are called objections, negative questions about the product. But if you know I've got exactly the right product to solve your situation, and I tell you a little story about how it's worked for all these other clients, then we've hit that win-win point, and you can be happy and I can be happy.
This is selling using stories, isn't it? Selling the sizzle.
It is important to use stories because you need to put pictures in the minds of your audience. And if people can actually see what you mean because of the story you've told about how this particular product helped solve a similar problem that another client had, then they can actually see it. A lot of my time in the media was in radio. I know you've had a lot of time in television, and I've done quite a bit in television too, but a lot of people in radio fall in love with radio because radio at its best is about putting pictures in people's minds. And great answers often involve giving an example or a little story which puts the right picture in people's minds. And that's one of the reasons why we in the radio world have this saying that radio is better than television, because in radio the pictures are better. And if you're answering the question, you're giving the example, you're telling the story, you're putting the picture in the mind of your audience. And that's where the answer back to your answer is, I see what you mean. And that's a good place to be.
What about crutches that some people have? I mean, a lot of people, when I was working in radio, there was always, it would be the station name, the station frequency, the telephone number. They were things that came readily to mind very quickly that I could use as a tool to give me thinking time. Do you think that's a good thing to have when you're answering questions, to have those things that you can draw on very quickly, a repertoire perhaps maybe of stock information or answers?
The answer is yes, but when you said crutches, I was immediately thinking...
You were thinking something else.
I was thinking blowtorch-on-the-belly questioners kicking people in the crutch. And you want to be ready for that. But you do want to have certain things. You don't want to be going in as a blank piece of canvas. I mean, you had the promotion from a moment, a guy called Ian Dixon about silence not being golden in business. And in fact, when we played it inside the studio, the secret is that in the studio we couldn't hear what he said.
Yeah.
But you did
I
nicely.
can hear him. I can hear him in my earpiece.
That's fine. I haven't been given the earpiece, so it was silent, but I still got the message. And the thing is that you want to have things on your agenda that you can say. Typically, if you take examples, little real-life stories, you're going into the job interview or into the sales discussion or into, you know, the inquiry into your behaviour, whatever it is, and you want to have different examples of great things that you've done. And it's like in your briefcase or in your handbag, you're pulling out this particular one to talk about. Now, you've asked me a question about that. Here's this particular example. So what I encourage people to do is build up a treasure chest of really good examples, really good stories to illustrate their point. And typically a good answer has a point as well as an illustration, which is typically that story or example. And if you've got a whole bunch of them, it makes it so much easier to get across your point in a way that people can actually have pictures in their minds and see it.
Have you got an example where you've seen that actually truly working? Can you think of a story right now where you've seen having that story has actually really enhanced the interview and made it more successful than it could have been?
I'll change the names in this story to make it right so that it gets past the legal people. But I was once working with a chief executive in tough times, and he was asked this tough question by his staff, which was a perfectly reasonable question: are our jobs safe? To which his stock answer was, no, they're not safe. So he was reinforcing
But he was being honest, though.
He gets 100% marks for honesty and openness, but he'd come to understand why the staff were leaving, you know, sending their CVs to other places. And when quizzed, one of the things was that one of the reasons that they weren't as safe as possible, even though the answer was he was going to do his best to make them as safe as possible, but he couldn't guarantee them. One of the things was that the company had been through tough times, a manufacturing company, and they do have particularly tough times sometimes. And in the previous recession, they'd actually had to reduce the size of the company to strengthen the company so it could get through the tough times. But they actually prospered, and they were then able to rehire some of the people. And they were in another tough situation, and I got him to tell the story of what happened last time, so that, you know, being told that unfortunately we tried to keep you on but we can't, if he had to have that conversation, then he at least had a positive story to go with it, which was, and I'll make up the names here, you know, that Fred and Martha were working here for 20 years and we had to lay them off in the last recession, but they were great employees just as you are, and as soon as we could, once the markets came back to us and we were prosperous again, we rehired them. In fact, they're both on staff now. You can go and talk to them, and they're earning far more money than they were when they started. And so by telling that story, a true story, actually helped people realise, look, there is a future to this company, and you know, it does actually ultimately care about its staff. And he could say that because often people make assertions. You know, this company will really look after you as far as it can, but often people don't believe assertions, and there's no reason why they should. But if you illustrate it by telling the right story, you're moving people over to seeing what you mean. And so having that treasure chest of stories that are accurate stories that you can reference help make your answers so much more credible and believable and get the right outcome that you are seeking in the best interests of your organisation and the people it deals with.
You know, it's very interesting sitting here watching you answering questions, because your body language is very this. It's all very open. What you say things like I see what you mean, and you don't very often use I hear what you're saying, but I see what you mean.
Well, people often do. It's I hear what you say means I know what you're saying, but I don't agree with it, and I don't like what you're saying. So I see what you mean is actually a much happier expression.
Very good indeed. Listen, there's more to come from Michael Dodd in just a few moments' time here on this edition of Business Connections Live. I just love all this, the whole linguistics, the whole way that people communicate. If you're not communicating effectively in your business, you could be doing untold damage to your organisation. Just getting your message across is so important in today's busy world. And the trouble is that if you're not getting your message across, somebody else will be getting a message across, perhaps about your organisation and you're not part of that. With social media, everything around us at the moment, once it's published there, it's out there in the open, and sometimes you can be caught a little bit on the back foot. So this is really good advice, and as I said, I cannot recommend highly enough. I actually found one picture of a train in here. I saw the other one, but there is a picture of a train. Can you remember what the train's about?
Yes, that came to me when I studied communications from Professor Peter Kenny in Australia, who was a psychologist who taught me at what is now the University of Technology in Sydney. And the train is a useful analogy which applies not just to answering questions, but for all communication, because you need to have a factual element and some emotional punch. Now, we have a train because Peter used that because the tracks give the guidance. So if you're answering a question, then you need to have factual underpinning to what you're saying. But the train will run along the tracks, providing it's got energy or fuel. And the fuel is analogous to the emotional punch. That's often in the story element of what you're saying. So if we build a fast-track train from here in Ashford, where the studio is, in Surrey, to the centre of London, the train will run along the tracks. That's the factual underpinning, but it will only get there if we provide electricity or something else for it to move along. And a great answer involves some factual content, because you do need to give people facts. That's often the bit you need to give first, answer the question. But then you need to get into the story element so people can see it, and that is often where the emotional element comes in. And a really good answer, just like a really good presentation to an audience, has the right combination of facts and emotion working together, and that is like a train running along the tracks with fuel, so that you're satisfying the emotional aspect with the fuel, the story element, and the factual underpinning element with the tracks, because that's where it's leading you where to go.
There we go, a short story about the train. Fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that. Okay. You're watching Business Connections Live, and a little bit of help from you to us, please, if you don't mind. Thousands of you are downloading the programme on iTunes at the moment. We really appreciate that. Each and every month, thousands of people will download, and they will take the programme with them. Now, iTunes, of course, is a huge audience. Now, you may notice as well that the algorithm on iTunes is quite clever. So what will happen is that when you finish maybe listening to another business programme, iTunes will recommend us to you. And the way that algorithm works is the more recommendations that we get from you, the more people will be recommended to watch the program. So you can help us actually grow the program. And we'd love you to do that if you don't mind. Thank you very much indeed. All you got to do is go to your iTunes page on your browser, click on View in iTunes. You see all the programs all listed out there. Go to the Ratings and Reviews tab, click on that. Once you click on that, that's going to take you down to this area here where it says Write a Review. All you got to do is say, Michael Dodd, greatest guy in the whole world, superb book, give him a 5-star review, leave that review, say how great you think the program is, and then iTunes will actually see that as a positive endorsement to the program, and that really will help us in the future. So the more people that download, the better for us, and the better for you, because it helps maintain the program. So please do give us a 5-star endorsement on iTunes and make Business Connections Live even more successful. You're watching Business Connections Live. In the studio today is Michael Dodd, professional speaker and author of Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work. It's been a fascinating insight into what we've been looking at. What can you do if your company's been asked questions about a tragic situation? You touched on it earlier on, where something has gone terribly badly wrong and people may well have been injured or killed. Or if it's your organisation's fault. We've seen people skate around. Theresa May recently has probably been the victim of this. Some people have capitalised on a situation, other people haven't. Are there, or is there, a rule of thumb when it comes to getting this kind of disaster recovery right?
There absolutely is, and I mentioned there's not just one golden formula, there's two. And the second one in the book is the one that you need when something really bad has happened. Then if you say it right and have the right lead up, ta-da, it's going to help persuade the jury or persuade the public. And so you need to be actually thinking about the mechanics of your story rather than just opening your mouth and hoping for the best.
So we've got great stories. We've prepped it. We've prepared what we're going to say. What about the way you deliver it, finally? What about the way that you use your voice to deliver that speech or answer that question? Are there techniques that you can use there? And what are they? Is it light and soft? Is it aggressive? Is it not aggressive? Are there any techniques that are more effective when you're being interviewed?
It's got to be right for that specific situation. So if I'm telling you a funny story, then, you know, I'm allowed to smile and you're allowed to laugh when I finish it. But if I'm telling you about a funeral after a tragedy that I went to, then obviously you need to look suitably sombre, otherwise you're looking disrespectful. So it's really important to actually have it thought out, and that's where, you know, really good comedians are often really good role models for us in a way, because a really good communicator, you know, Michael McIntyre live at the Apollo, you know, he's telling stories effectively. You know, some of them are pure jokes, some of them are based on truth, but it's pretty clear he's not just thinking about it on the spot when he's there under the spotlights at the Apollo. You know, he's thought about it, and what's he done? He's done lots of other gigs with smaller audiences where he's planned, prepared, practiced and honed his craft. And that can be a good role model in some ways, because, you know, not that you have to be funny, but if you're telling a story and it's well planned, prepared and practiced, then you know how to tell it to maximise the punch and to assist the outcome you want. Another good role model, speaking of the actual body positions, etc., are weather forecasters. Weather forecasters, they are very good at, they keep eye contact with the camera, they've got their map behind them, and they're telling you things, and even if there's bad weather, their hand movements are very smooth. So it may be wild weather coming up from the south or whatever, but it's very graceful and smooth, and quite reassuring, I imagine, if you're in a hurricane zone or whatever and you're watching the weather forecaster. But the weather forecaster's job is to be reassuring and to be as helpful as possible. He has to tell people what they need to know.
They never point, do they?
They're very gracious.
So is this, isn't it?
It's an art form, yes.
It is an art form.
Pointing, we're told, is very rude when you're young. At least we were in Australia, where there's a lot of politeness in Australia, as you would know. And so, smooth, gracious gestures without vigorous pointing is good. And on body language, what you don't want, and I'll demonstrate bad practice here, is to be saying, on behalf of our company, everything's totally under control. And wild, jerky movements are suggesting that everything is totally out of control. So warm, smooth, flowing gestures like those lovely weather presenters provide great role models for us all.
And there we are. It's all open gestures. There's somebody that I can trust. Michael, we always ask our guests to look straight down camera number 4, the one that's over here, that's got no number on it, to look down there to say who they are, where they're from, and they give us the key takeaways from today's programme that we need to be remembering. The airways are all yours. Who you are, where you're from. Michael, the airways are all yours.
So, I'm Michael Dodd, D-O-D-D. I'm from Australia, but I've been living in London for a long time, and I work on 6 continents around the world, not Antarctica yet. And because of my background in Australian journalism, where the journalists are really tough, Steve mentioned earlier a guy called Jeremy Paxman, and he's reasonably tough, but by Australian standards, that's not really tough. So we're used to in Australia asking blowtorch-on-the-belly questions of people, and I can help you give answers on behalf of your business or your organisation to give great answers to tough blowtorch-on-the-belly questions, whether they're tough questions, nasty questions, stupid questions, or my specialty area coming from Australia, really ignorant questions, which can really infuriate you. But we can equip you and your team to actually give great answers, whatever is thrown at you. And when you get it right, you not only feel far more confident because you get the content right, the structure right, and your delivery style right. You've got a right to feel confident, but you're also doing the best for the answerers, for the questioners, because the questioners deserve a great answer, and you can be shown how to do it every time.
So there we are. My thanks to Michael Dodd. If you want to visit his website, you can go along to michaeldoddcommunications.com. There's a whole host of information sitting on there. Nice video you can find out. You can see actually the different things that Michael and his team actually help you with. Speaking at your event media classes, presentation coaching, the Dodd blog with great advice in there. Get your message across. This is a really important one, I think. Get your message across in 60 seconds. Stand out in just the right way. Don't forget as well, for that matter, the book, Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work, is available on Amazon, or you can go to the website michaeldoddcommunications.com, and if you click on the book, it'll take you along. Oh, there's a book. There it is. You can click on the link and it'll take you along to Amazon so that you can get your copy of it. A cracking book to read. Really a very readable book. That's what's so nice about it. Once again, my thanks to you, Michael, for joining us in the studio today. Thank you for coming on Business Connections Live.
Great to be here on Business Connections Live. And I've actually watched some of your programs, and they're really good. Did you know that?
I'm very pleased to hear that. Thank you very much indeed. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed today's program. I hope you're going to find it useful. What have we got lined up in the next couple of weeks for you on our program next week? We're talking to Kate Cook. She's been on the program before. She's been talking about nutrition in business and how to be more healthy. A healthy mind, a healthy body will help you be, well, healthy. So that's really good. Coming up on future programs, we've got Julian Ponan. She was recently on Dragon's Den, turned it down actually, and also Warren Knight's going to be coming on the show. So until we do it all again, thank you very much indeed for watching us today. Till we do it all again live next Monday, have yourself a great week. Bye for now. Bye-bye.